So Dr. Betty, we're always needing to evolve. How should leaders rethink what engagement is in a meeting? Because sometimes I get frustrated, well, I'll ask a question and everybody just sits there for a little bit, and then someone takes a spark and goes first. And then, so how can I reset the engagement?
Well, there are two things with this as well. So the first is, let's get a common definition of engagement. Csikszentmihalyi, who coined the term flow, says engagement is you are so into the work that you lose your sense of time. You're so enjoying what's happening that you're all in. So there's no temptation to multitask because you're loving it. So we need to create that kind of engagement rather than measuring engagement as to whether people have their camera on and they're staring at it. Right? That's not engagement. That's performance. That's performing arts. That's being on stage and striving to create an impression versus truly being engaged in the work. And the way that we create engagement in the work is we don't just tell people this is what we're going to talk about. We craft an agenda in the form of questions, and we assign each question in the agenda to the attendee who has the most subject matter expertise on that question. When you do that, you distribute the leadership responsibility of the meeting, and you say to people, here's an invitation. I want you to talk about this particular question that we need an answer to in order to hit that target outcome that's in the calendar invite.
What about a leader? Let me ask you a question about a leader, because I'm the chairman, CEO, but I don't usually lead the meetings. I let other people lead the meetings. Is that a good thing, bad thing, what?
Well, I think it depends on how the CEO is thinking about letting other people lead. In other words, are you providing the example that if we don't have a target outcome for this meeting, we're not having a meeting?
We don't. That's a definite for my meetings. Like, what is the purpose? We usually talk about what is the purpose of the meeting right up front, so we all know. We do our small talk. We do a lot of that, and then all of a sudden, so well, we got it. Let's get moving. And then we usually say, okay, what's the purpose of the meeting? So we all know where we're coming from. Usually that's stated ahead of time, but not everybody reads everything. Not everybody pays attention.
Well, so I want to really just dig in on this. What is our purpose? Where are we coming from is one thing. A target outcome is where are we going and where are the goalposts on this football field? How will we know when we have a touchdown? So having that goal that in this meeting, we are going to hit this target outcome gives people a way to know what contributions are relevant and what contributions aren't. How should the meeting be designed? How should it not be designed? Who should be there? Who gets a buy? It doesn't have to be at this weekly meeting because they're not going to be contributing. So that nuance between purpose and target outcome is absolutely essential, and it's looked over by most people.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because everybody's done this, but I want to talk about multitasking. What's the impact of multitasking during a meeting? Now, I do my best never to do it during an interview, but sometimes we do it during the meeting. We check our phone, we see an email, we respond to a text real quick. What's the impact of that?
The impact of multitasking can be really positive or negative. I think the bigger question is, how do we keep people from doing the negative kind of multitasking, right? So multitasking can be really good. If I'm making a note, it looks as if I'm disengaged, right? I'm doing it right now, I'm making a note because I'm going to remember. And so that's not disengagement, that's thinking. And many, many people must look away from the visual distraction, the animation, to look down to a quiet place and make a note. It's how they process. So point one, don't think people are disengaged just because they're looking down. It doesn't mean they're necessarily checking their cell phone. The second thing is, if the conversation is useful to them, they will not do the useless multitasking activity because they don't want to miss anything. So the answer to how to avoid that disruptive multitasking is, if someone's contributions aren't essential to the meeting and what they're going to hear from other people is not essential to their job, find another way to get their voice in the room. Don't have them attend an hour meeting and speak for 5 minutes. Yeah.
And the other thing, I can remember sitting in a meeting with a client, a very, very well-known individual. Everybody's a world-renowned expert. and was doing some work with him and his team. And I remember I was taking notes on my computer while I was sitting there at the conference room, and he yelled at me and said, "Shut that computer down." And I said, "I'm taking notes." He said, "You are not. Shut the computer down." I shut the computer down, and I fired the client on the spot and left.
Yes.
Because again, didn't respect the way that I needed to take notes, the way I wanted to do it, because I don't write things on paper anymore and so forth. I think it's interesting. Where does this gets into the balance of power, maybe a balance of responsibility for the meeting experience? Who does it reside in? And whether it's a meeting by video, a conference call, or in person, who does that responsibility really reside?
The person who initiates the meeting and is the facilitator, or the person who kicks it off, the one who's responsible for crafting at least the draft agenda, they are responsible for setting the stage. And setting the stage is everything. If you think of a meeting as a social construct, which Helen Schwartzman back in 1986 made a case for this. We show up and we think it's a work tool, and maybe it's that, but it's really a social construct where there are these tacit agreements in play. And when people do things that offend us, we get upset. And when people do things that make us feel good, we want to work with them more. It's social. So the way you set the stage for this social encounter is you do things like putting the target outcome in the invite, deciding who needs to be there and who doesn't to hit that target, crafting your agenda in the form of questions. And here's the thing, if you don't have any questions, you don't have a meeting. You have a big fat tail. So record yourself and send it out instead of wasting people's synchronous time, right? Yeah, so the responsibility lies with that person. And then if you do a good job in setting the stage, your meeting attendees will be able to come and share the ownership of what happens in the meeting. But there are some things you need to do, and that's what's in the recipe in my book.
I got time for 2 quick questions. So the first one I want to know is, what should all companies make sure to incorporate when planning virtual and hybrid meetings so they're most impactful and beneficial for everyone? What's the most important piece of that?
The most important piece of that is to have empathy. So this is your North Star. And empathy in this context means you understand how your people are feeling cognitively. And then you also relate to it emotionally, their feelings, not yours. Oh, I feel the same as you. No, you don't feel the same as me, right? We all feel differently. So let it resonate, but don't try to mimic it. This is impossible. And then design your meetings so that you're giving people what they need for that emotional state. Now, this just sounds very kumbaya and woo-woo and, too soft. And I don't have time for that. But I'm insisting that you do have time because it's a time saver. You do have time because it reduces your turnover. So it's that empathy that's really the cornerstone of that 85-page book. What does empathy look like in the remote and hybrid meeting context? What exactly do you do? It's not rocket science, but it will change up what happens in your meetings and what happens after.
Yeah, and it'll also turn you from the great resignation into the great transformation. I'll guarantee you that if you do that. All right, one last quick question, 30 seconds left to go. What is the one thing leaders should start implementing today to increase productivity and build stronger team bonds besides empathy?
Well, it all starts with empathy. So it's not just besides, it's embedded. I would say because cameras are so contentious, poll your team and find out how they feel about camera use. Start there to meet their needs. If people don't want cameras on, if they don't think they're essential to the meeting, make them optional.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's tough to do if you're a TV company, video company, but that I can get it. All right, we've been talking with Dr. Betty Johnson, president of Bridging the Difference and author of the bestseller, Making Virtual Work, How to Build Performance and Relationships. I know I learned a few things. Dr. Betty, thanks for being a part of All Business right here on C-Suite Radio and C-Suite TV.
Thank you.
Hey, at the end of every show, I like to talk about what I learned. And I like the way she said, frame what the outcome of the meeting is going to be. Now, I always do that with our team. right? The first thing I say is, what are we going to accomplish from this meeting? Now, she's saying doing it a little bit nicer, and also to make sure you put that up front. I've always put in there our weekly meetings, our ops meetings, whatever those might be, but it would be great to put the real big topic in there, wouldn't it? And the big accomplishment. So that's something that I learned, and it will be a little bit easier for everybody to know, so they won't have to second guess or go looking for the agenda and everything else that you got to have. It would be great to be able to have. That's what I learned right here from Dr. Betty Johnson from Charlotte, North Carolina. And of course, what a great guest right here on All Business with Jeffrey Hayzlett on C-Suite Radio and C-Suite TV. Don't forget, tell your friends.